Here we are a year later. Exactly a year for me since I recorded my first video, 31st of May 2020, talking about my experiences of being a black woman here in the UK. I had no idea that video was going to open up this path that I've been on for the last 365 days. And even as I'm sat here recording this, I'm acutely aware of the fight that I continued to push for over the last year is no different to previous generations, to generations before the last generation, and so on and so forth. I didn't want to do a typical video that kind of went, oh, here's the great things that I've done over the last year, and I'm really proud that I've accomplished this, this, and this. I could reel off some stats, talk to you about how many videos, ridiculous amount of videos I've done, the live conversations, how I feel, the lessons I've learned. But instead, I want to share with you some of the mistakes that I think that I've made. Not that I think, I know I've made. And how they've been teachable moments for me and still remain teachable moments for me. I regret that I begged and pleaded for organisations, for leadership teams to acknowledge and recognise their black colleagues. And the reason why I regret that is not because I don't want them to do that, but the begging and the pleading was an example of how disempowered I felt. I literally, in that moment and the subsequent days after, gifted all my power away. I kept thinking, and every so often, like that voice is still in my head that says, who are you to be so vocal about this, to be so challenging, to be so demanding? You're a mum of 2 children living in Kent, in a part of the UK that globally most people haven't heard of. I'm not an influencer. I'm not the CEO of a great big sexy brand. I didn't have thousands and thousands of followers and people engaging with me. So it wasn't about using a platform I already established and flipping that into going, right, I'm just now going to talk about racism. I started from the very bottom, feeling like I was talking and nobody was listening. And in that moment, and many of those moments since, the language that I used, the ferocity in which I begged and I pleaded came from a place of thinking, I can't do this. Came from a place of also thinking, black people, we can't do this. And the reason why I think it's a mistake, partly is because clearly I no longer feel like that now. But also the unintentional consequence of that is I think I tapped into white guilt and I tapped into white saviorism and the idea that as black people, we need rescuing. We need charity. We need benevolence. And that's what I regret. Because in doing that, I gifted not only my power away, but in some instances, created an impression that as black people, we were waiting to be saved. Now, in my mind, it took me 17, 18 years now to find my voice, to speak up about racism, to be able to talk about white supremacy and white privilege, but almost move on from that and start to get people to understand the devastating impact of living in a racialized society, the devastating impact of us having systems and ways of doing things, ways of working, ways of interrelating with each other, with people from other countries, with different cultures, that comes from a place of assuming that whiteness is the standard. So I very much fed into this idea that black people were a minority rather than we were minoritized. I talked about, businesses should be thinking about how they employ more diverse people, unaware at that point that I was still perpetuating white supremacy myself and still complicit in that. Because when we talk about diverse, we are talking about people who aren't white, cisgendered, male, able-bodied, straight, you know, all of those things. So the assumption is that if you fit that box, you are normal and anyone else is diverse. And so when I see some of my earlier videos, I am like, oh God, Shireen, like, you know, I've grown since then. But it is something that plays on my mind every so often. I don't sink under the weight of it, but I wish I hadn't have felt like I was on my hands and knees begging for the white masters to free the black enslaved people. Now, I don't judge myself harshly for that. You know, I'm being honest in some of the things that I wish I'd done differently, particularly because I was challenged by people at the time and I genuinely didn't see it, because all I thought was, well, I'm getting people to listen, so does it matter? Right, people are listening. I wasn't cognizant of just how many people were listening, because that's not what I was thinking about. I was thinking about I've got all this pent up stuff to talk about. Do you know what I mean? So I wasn't intentional, because it was coming from a place of emotion. I was hurt, I was deeply upset, I was annoyed, I was bitter, I was angry at the world, at society, at people I deemed professional friends, right? Who said nothing, did nothing. Even to this day, there are people that I have not spoken to since that video has come out, have never supported, have never engaged. And I was also very aware of the risk that I was taking to become what I'd spent nearly 20 years trying not to be, and that was the black woman talking about racism. And now I'm the black woman talking about racism. Go figure. The other mistake that I made is allowing myself to be used like a vessel. So as I started speaking out more and more, and for whatever reason, some of the words and the context and the meaning of what I said kind of cut through the noise a little bit, particularly in the LinkedIn digisphere. And so I had hundreds of people reach out, you know, connections of connections, you know, oh, to go and talk to Shireen about this racism thing. She will help you understand. I spent a disproportionate amount of time on Zoom calls, on phone calls, replying back to messages. And it was all majority with people who wanted to take from me, who wanted the insight of a black woman to help them understand what was happening in the world. And I mistakenly, so the mistake I made, that I was too giving with my time, too giving from that perspective, because you've got to remember, I was producing a stupid amount of content. So there's lots of stuff out there. You just had to listen and watch. So it wasn't as if I wasn't doing anything. But in my mind, I was thinking, well, their curiosity, their need to understand this will have a direct cause and effect on, after a conversation with me, they'll go off and do the changes that I spend so much time talking about. Whether that was from me flattering myself or thinking ego, like, you know, like my voice is what's the word, more laser focused than all of the voices that have come before me and all of the people that are doing what they can do to affect change. I have no idea, but I just felt like the more conversations I have, the more I say yes, is the more change I could affect. And what became apparent 6 months down the line and now a year down the line is, to some extent, I was used. I was used as a way to ease white guilt. And the reason why I say that is because there are some very influential people in the business world who I spoke to, who are chair people, who are non-executive directors, who are chief people officers, who are CEOs, CFOs, CMOs, all of the C-suite. And I've kept an eye on what they've been doing since. Like, they don't know, you know, and that's fine. I don't often talk about it, and it's that's not the point. But I can see what they haven't done. I can hear the stories from their black colleagues in those said organisations to say that nothing much has changed. And I will take my mistake one step further and to say, so, you know, on one hand that I was too giving, but on the other hand, I was also naive in thinking that if I could start people off on this journey of awakening, new consciousness, thinking about how we can push past our discomfort and be part of the solution, and focus on helping people who still needed a little bit of convincing. I spent too much time with engaging with individuals who didn't even believe racism is a thing, who still don't believe that racism is a thing, and or believe that black people are being too demanding or we're being too impatient. So I spent more time having conversations about that, missing many opportunities to be engaging with, to be being around people who already get the memo, who don't need convincing, they're just not sure how to go and enact change. And as I said, whether that's from, you know, like ego, flattering myself, whatever, and I was just thinking, you know, like the more people I could bring with me, that awareness must turn into action. It must convert into action. And then a year later, here we are. You know, even if you ignore my perspectives on how much change has actually happened, like tangible action since last year, and you listen and you read and you watch the stories and the experiences from black colleagues in the workplace, whether it's here, whether it's in the US, whether it's in Australia, whether it's in, you know, South Africa, fundamentally nothing much has changed. So somehow I've spent all of this time trying to increase awareness, thinking that once I've done that, people will be fine. Because, you know, like once they've woken up and realised that, you know, the world isn't as they saw things, they'll keep on going. And that didn't happen, or didn't happen enough. Like I have a list of the organisations and the individuals within them. So let me, you know, put the responsibility where it should squarely lie. And that's people who see race as a protected characteristic, so a tick box to do something about, who tell me that they will never get the board to sign off on doing anything that's just about black people because, quote unquote, there aren't enough black people in the business to justify that. But also at the same time, they're grappling with, well, we think we can offer a service to help other organisations grapple with this issue, so we kind of need to do this first so we can commercialise the support that you're giving us, so we can offer that to other clients. Or I have other people coming to me and my colleagues within HR Rewired and wanting solutions, but that are delivered in a way that means we don't use divisive language, that we tone it down, that we don't hit people over the head, that we be aware that people aren't ready to hear about white supremacy. So can we talk about the importance of inclusion rather than start off with racism? Can we jump to allyship? And the mistake I made is that I never challenged hard enough, but I didn't say no enough times. I said no, don't get me wrong. Like my list of no's reigns supreme, but I didn't say enough. I didn't say no enough times. Because everyone thinks like ticking the box is literally as simple as, you know, we're going to do training in X, Y, and Z, but you can have a tick in the box attitude by continuing to prioritise your comfort over the discomfort of your black colleagues. And then you're coming to me, and I allowed that to find ways to not only ease your guilt, but try and find shortcuts. So you're looking at me to try and not give you an idea of what the how could look like, but what's the cheapest, what's the easiest, what's the quickest way to demonstrate that you're taking action without really doing the work. And in some instances, I co-sign that. And I'll tell you the reason why I know I co-signed that, because a year later, when the colleagues within those businesses are whispering in my ear, and I go, you know, how things are going because, you know, your business was committing to this, this and this. And they were like, yeah, don't watch that. Don't watch what's shared publicly because internally they've done sweet FA. So then I have to take some responsibility for that because I engaged in some of those conversations. I said yes to things that I shouldn't have done. So I think those are like the three biggest mistakes. So that's it. So that's my three mistakes that I have made over the last year, but also that drives, therefore, the way that I show up and where I focus my time and energy in the year ahead. We have to be thinking about sustainability, incorporating how we treat people. We have to be thinking about business practices that seek to tackle structural racism. We have to do away with repeating initiatives and programs that focus purely on transactional change. We have to be willing to commit the time, energy, the resource, and the discomfort to go after transformational change, which means we are focused on reducing barriers, not fixing people. There are more things that I need to say no to, so after recording this video I will go back and say more no's. Just got a few more just to take off my list. But I'm deeply committed to this. I'm not fazed by those people who want to label me a racist for focusing time and energy on improving the experiences of Black people in the workplace, dismantle some of those structural barriers for Black business owners, and how we can stop leaving opportunity, profit, if that's your motivator, on the table purely because of prejudice, racism, discrimination, apathy, silence, and discomfort. So here we are, 31st of May 2021, a year to the day where it all started. I'm still here, still going. Thank you for listening.